Welcome to today's webinar, 30 or so things to make your content better. My name is Ian Lurie. I'm the CEO of Portent, and I'll be running the webinar and giving the presentation today. Just so everybody knows, I am a little diseased and somewhat stoned on Dayquil. I wanted to take a friend's suggestion to have a hot toddy on top of that, but figured that probably wouldn't work so well, so here I am. And I'm hoping that Vicks won't sue me for using their box in my presentation. I figure it's good promotion. Couple disclaimers. I was just making fun of Los Angeles. I grew up in New Jersey, lived in Los Angeles, so having grown up in New Jersey, swearing is sometimes punctuation for me. I will try to keep things PG, maybe PG-13 at worst, but I try to never say words that would not show up on A&E. So anyway, moving on from there. At the very end of this presentation, I will have a link. It will point back at a blog post on our site that has a link to the slide deck. It'll have a link to some sample HTML that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. It's also going to have a link eventually to the video that I'm recording right now. If you have questions in the course of this presentation, you can ask them in the questions box in GoToWebinar, or you can tweet me at PortentInt and at the hashtag PortentU. And I'll answer those questions at the end. If you raise your hand in the course of the presentation, I'll try to answer it, but I'm not a very good multitasker when it comes to presenting, so I'll have to be kind of careful about that. Now, I'll tell you one thing right away. This presentation is very much tactical. All right, this is almost pure tactics. I'm not going to talk much strategy, and there's a reason for that I'll get to in a minute. But part of what I have to warn everybody is some of this stuff you've heard from me before. I'm going to talk about some little content polish tricks that I've talked about before, and I guess what I'm going to say is I still see these things happening all the time, and I'll stop saying these things when we all start doing them. I am as guilty as everybody else at lapsing on a lot of this stuff. And part of why I hit tactics so much and so often is because you can have the best strategy in the world and you're still fighting against hundreds or thousands of other sites and writers and content producers who are all really good at this, who are all producing good stuff, and somehow you have to stand out. So this is all about those little things, right? The little things that can boost your content and make it work better. It's really, really important that you execute on this stuff, because execution is half the battle here. And this is what we've lived at Portent for years, is produce lots of good stuff, but also do the best job we can of execution. We are far from perfect, very far from perfect, but we do the best we can. And if you do that, if you're very consistent about it, as the years pass, you build more and more traffic to your site, which hopefully turns into greater and greater engagement and helps you grow your business. But it is more than just the strategy. And believe me, strategy is crucial. And I'm not downplaying strategy. We help clients build strategy. But at the same time, you got to be doing those little things. And part of this is it's easy for folks to look at this and say, oh, you know what? Never mind. I'm an executive, I'm a manager, I'm a team lead. I'm not the one who's producing this content anymore. And because I'm not the one producing this content anymore, I don't actually need to worry about the detail stuff, right? I need to have my team take care of that. I can't take care of it myself. Well, even in that case, this is about team expectations. All right. This is about everybody on the team knowing what to expect of everybody else. So for example, if you're a producer, a writer, or something else, you need to be able to communicate with the designer in their language. If you're a designer, you need to know what to expect to be handed to you when you get a piece of content. If you're in charge, if you're the CEO, CMO, VP of marketing, manager of the marketing team, head of content, whatever, you need to know what you need to expect from your team, and you need to set a lot of very clear expectations around that. It has to be something that's really that you can put down on paper. This is how it will look. And that's what a lot of this is about. Okay, it's about polishing up your content and ensuring that what you present has a certain consistent level of quality and adheres to a certain fixed set of rules, so that no matter what cool stuff you create, it's always at a certain minimum level of quality. See, this is the Dayquil kicking in already. But anyway, I'll try not to start babbling here. I really will. The first rule here is it's all content. All right, the first thing I hear from potential clients all the time, and from my own team, by the way, and in my own brain, is that content is blog posts, right? We all fall into this kind of trap where we're talking about content, and when we're talking about content, we're talking about blog posts. So we say, we will produce more content for you. And what we really mean is we will produce more blog posts. Blog posts are always where we start, and they shouldn't be. Because content is any form of communications. It's anything that you say or someone else says about you, your product, your service, your brand, whatever, anywhere on the internet at any point in time. And by the way, off the internet. A product page is content. And maybe when you take all these tactics that I'm about to present to you, you should take them and apply them to your product pages before you take the time to write new blog posts. A tweet is definitely content, right? A picture of two lizards lounging on a lounge chair. This is a hilarious video, by the way, because they're just kicking it. And they are alive. They're not stuffed or something. That's content, right? A news article with my comments about Capybara. If you know me, you know how obsessed I am about Capybara. They're loose in Toronto. I want to fly to Toronto and see if I can catch them. But comments are content as well. Your homepage is content. A search listing, a search ranking is content, right? And so is a video about brushing your cat. So all these things are types of information that, these are all communications about you, your brand, your services, or something. They're all content. And yes, even this, it's an actual photo of a sign that I found in Puerto Vallarta. This is, believe it or not, content. And clearly it worked. I remembered it. I took a picture of it. But anyway, if you ever want to buy pharmaceuticals cheap, I guess you can get them in Puerto Vallarta. The second tip is remember that content is a product. Okay, it's a product that people are buying, and they're buying it with time. And you need to deliver a really good return on that first investment. When they spend their time, you've got to deliver something really good, and that's what content is all about. All right, that it's the first thing I spend, quote unquote, when I come to you. And if you want to provide a really good customer experience, what do you always say? You need to provide the customer with a good return on investment. This is the first investment that they make. So just keep that in mind all the time. And then remember the ripple effect. All right, and after this, we're going to get very tactical. So, but one last sort of strategic thinking here. Remember the ripple effect. Content affects everything above it. So if you think of marketing as sort of a stack, right, content influences every channel. And it also ripples across many, many different venues. So as an example here, maybe you produce a blog post or a page on your site or a product or a video or something, and then someone tweets about it, right? And then someone else retweets that tweet. And the next thing you know, you send out an email promoting it, or somebody else does. And then that generates another tweet, which leads to a Facebook post. And then all of a sudden, you've got all these little bits of content all over the map, right? And if you think of every one of these pieces of content as places, and you're generating more and more places, you want to give people great places to go. So you have to always think about the fact that content generates these ripples. It creates all these new places. When you create one thing, you're creating something that's going to spawn many other things. And a lot of the tips in here deal with how you respond to and how you work with all those additional places, the ripple effect. How do you capitalize on that? And I'm going to start with some of the standard stuff. All right, just grammar and writing, because to be honest, this is where I see a lot of things falling apart. I think someone's asking whether a hashtag is content. I'm not sure. Yes, a hashtag is definitely content. And as far as a hashtag for this presentation, it's hashtag PortentU, all one word. So grammar and writing, a big part of this for me is that this is not an existential experience. You're not James Joyce, and I will admit I have a certain hatred for James Joyce, having read Ulysses and a few other things like The Dubliners, and I'm still post-traumatic from it. But anyway, you're not James Joyce, all right? This is not some kind of existential artistic experience. It should be brilliant stuff, but as David Ogilvy once said, if it doesn't sell, it's not creative. And remember the business that we're in, right? We're in the business of marketing. And the first thing is just edit your work. The way I edit, if I have the time, is I take the piece of writing that I've done, and I read it forwards, and then I read it backwards a paragraph at a time, then I read it backwards a sentence at a time, and then I read it backwards a word at a time. What that does for me is it lets me break things down, right? So first I read the whole thing as a unit, and then I read each paragraph, then each sentence, then each word, so that that normal syndrome that happens where you've looked at it so many times you don't catch the mistakes, that goes away. You're able to actually keep track of what's going on and read it as a new reader each time. And then I'll try to get someone else to read it as well. And by the way, this is for again, standard blog posts and product descriptions and everything, but it's also for transcripts, anything that I'm writing that's going to lead to other types of content. But of course, we all know you never get to do this, right? You never have time to do it. So there are some tools, and anyone who's heard me speak about this knows I have some favorite tools. The first one is Grammarly. Grammarly is a computerized editor for your content, and I will never say that a computer is better than a person at editing and at proofreading, but Grammarly is pretty awesome. All right, so you can take your content and paste it into Grammarly, and it finds things like, Brian's versus brains, and it finds things like where you use helmets, but it should be possessive instead of plural. So it's a little bit better than just a spell checker, and it's a lot better than the grammar checker in Microsoft Word or anything like that. So you definitely want to use Grammarly. And by the way, it has a plugin that runs in your email as well. So if you use Gmail or something, it can proof your emails, which of course are also content, even if you're just sending it to 2 or 3 people. So here you can see it caught all these issues. I fixed them all, and my score goes up, and I've just taken care of a few really embarrassing mistakes. You can use a site called wordy.com. I don't want to diss Wordy, but the thing I'll tell you is that you really have to know who it is that's doing the editing for you. So it's sort of it's not crowdsourced exactly, but it's a contract portal for editors. And I've had some very good editors, and I've had ones that have let some really bad stuff kind of pass by. Let's see, a couple people said they just lost volume. Is anyone else having issues with lost volume? Could be me leaning back from the mic or something. Everybody's saying there's no audio. Oh, goody. All right, hold on. Testing to see. Testing. And it's all showing that it's still working here, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on. Let me just double check. Is everybody seeing my slides change? Okay, well, I'm going to keep going. This is being recorded, and it looks like it may have just come back. And I'll just edit this out. That's the beauty of recording these things. So Wordy, you want to be a little bit careful with exactly who you get as an editor. I've had very good luck, not so good luck. And by the way, this kind of editing, again, you think it's just for text or blog posts. Well, I will bet that Mitt Romney wishes he had this one back. Because a better immersia is not what he was trying to run for president to create. I think he probably meant America, and obviously a little spell checker would have done him a lot of good here. So anyway, it's about all sorts of different kinds of content. The other thing is to brevitimate, aka be concise. I just created a new word, which I think is just awesome. You want to make sure that your writing is as concise as humanly possible. You can embellish. There's always times when you want to embellish. There's always times when you want to make your content a little bit, there's times when 3 words is better than 1. But as much as possible, you want to make sure that you're not using more words than you need to. And my favorite way to edit this is with something called Hemingway. This is the HemingwayApp.com, and of course Hemingway was sort of the opposite of James Joyce. And you can take a look at this tool. What you do is you cut and paste your content right into it, and it will immediately give you a look at hard to read sentences. It'll check grade level. It will look and see whether you're using adverbs, passive voice, and these are a couple things that I'll be talking about in a minute as well. So it's a great tool for doing this. And notice, I'm going to leave one complex sentence in there. Right, just because it says a sentence is complex doesn't mean you need to really worry about it. It's just that this is a really good tool, again, to give you that quick, high-level look when you don't have time to do an edit yourself, you don't have time to give it to someone else, or even just as a gut check after you've done all that. Reduce the number of adverbs. I this is a teenage thing now too. My kids are always saying, you know, I literally fell off the swing set. And I'm like, well, as opposed to figuratively falling off the swing set. Anyway, small side rant there. You don't want to use too many adverbs. And again, this is a silly detail thing, but set the expectation with your team, set it with yourself. If you're a designer, make sure, you know, if you're having trouble wedging a piece of text into a particular part of a layout, this is a good place to look first, right? Take out some of those adverbs. Learn to use commas. Again, seems like a silly thing, but I see this all the time. I saw it on a movie poster a couple years ago, this and the wrong use of lightning. So, you know, here, our planes have great restrooms, flight attendants. I think this is supposed to mean our planes have great restrooms, comma, flight attendants, comma, and seats. And yes, I'm using an Oxford comma. I like them. If you don't like them, that's fine. I don't want to start some kind of war over Oxford commas or not. Use the active voice. And this is probably the thing I see go wrong most often in online writing. And the reason for it is we're often trying to be polite. We don't necessarily feel like we should point at the reader, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute too. So you end up with things like the house was painted by me, right? Or I don't think my writing is liked by all. You could just say I painted the house, right? If you did something, or if someone acted on someone else, or something acted on something else, just say so. You don't need to get fancy about it. So again, avoid passive voice. It disconnects the action from the thing, which in the kind of writing most of us are doing is not a good idea. Learn how to use colons and semicolons. This one just drives me nuts because I read so much writing and I edit writing from all over the place. I read so much writing where it's misused. You know, semicolons are for joining together sentences where you might otherwise use a conjunction if it makes sense. It's also for joining together, well, it's kind of wishy-washy, but joining together stuff that's kind of related. And it can also be used in lieu of a comma. So that's what you use a semicolon for. You use a colon for lists, right? So, or for a definition, you know, so you have the word, or this means colon, and then the definition. I'm sure I'm going to get a storm of tweets about how I'm saying this wrong, but the main thing to understand is semicolon is for linking things together. A colon is for linking a topic to a definition or a statement to a list. It's another one that I see a lot, and this is sort of similar to using too many adverbs, but there are all these words and phrases that you just don't need to have, right, that are just unnecessary, and they're called plague words, and I have a huge list of them up, and again, this link will be on the blog post that I will link to at the very end of this. You know, plague words are just things, words and phrases where you can save yourself a lot of verbs and a lot of nouns. Like beyond a shadow of a doubt can just be definitely. You know, indeed, regardless, simply put, obviously, none of those need to be there, right? Indeed means whatever you're going to say is what you're saying, so just say it. Regardless, same thing. Simply put, well, I hope so. And obviously, well, if it is, then you don't need to say that. The one I do most often is under no circumstances. I went to law school, and this one comes up all the time for me. Under no circumstances, you can just say never. It works fine. This one's a little more controversial. I personally think that anyone who produces any content at this point has to have HTML as part of their skill set. If you are not able to, at least minimally, I don't mean you have to be able to build a web page from scratch. I just mean you have to be able to produce, you need to be able to control things like headings. And properly create lists and do stuff like that. Otherwise, you're kind of back in the 1960s where the copywriting team wrote the copy and threw it over the wall to whoever was going to make it look nice. And the problem with that now is we have these designers who are awesome, and because they're awesome, they have a million people coming to them all at once, all asking for stuff, and they can't necessarily help us split paragraphs up correctly. And they don't need to help us create a level 1 heading. All right, we should be able to do that. So a few things, and some of these are pure HTML, some of these are just basic formatting, but you never want to have more than 4 to 5 lines in a paragraph. All right, if you're writing a novel, it's fine, but otherwise, you know, this is just terrifying. and you don't need to show this to people, you want to break it up, right? Any kind of break, and you want to break it up logically. You don't just take a paragraph and break it into random sentences. But this does date back to the 60s and David Ogilvy, and this is one of the things that he talked about all the time. Now, HTML, when you're breaking up those paragraphs, use a paragraph element, not a line break. Okay, so the P and the less than greater than sign, that's a paragraph element. BR is a hard line break, and it's as if you're in a word processor like Microsoft Word, and a hard line break is when you hit Shift Enter, and a paragraph break is when you just hit Enter or Return, whatever you want to call it. This is how that looks in HTML. This is two hard line breaks to split up paragraphs like this. And the problem with that is it makes formatting a lot harder, and it makes it harder to move your content around. It makes it harder to repurpose your content. And as you'll see in a minute, it makes subtle changes to the way a page looks. This is the way you want to do it. So you can see this piece of content is surrounded by a P and then a closing P element, a closing P tag. That's the P element. And by the way, if you're using something like WordPress, it will do this for you, as long as you don't hit Shift Return. And this gives you a ton more versatility. It gives you better forming in most templates, because most designers will create specific formatting for paragraphs. And what their formatting will do is it will split paragraphs with a certain amount of spacing. It will make sure that lists and other things are spaced a certain way between paragraph elements. If you just use hard line breaks, none of that formatting comes into play, and things can look really, really strange. It's also much better for later redesigns, right? If you use paragraphs correctly, then all your design team has to do is tweak the cascading style sheets, the styles attached to paragraphs, and every paragraph on the site updates and adjusts. When you're doing a headline, and this is a lot like Microsoft Word, don't just bold something, use an actual heading element. So here, I created a heading on the page, right? Why don't digital marketers own the world? And I just made it bold, which does make it stand out, but it's not structurally a heading. Here, I actually created it as a level 1 heading. That's what that H1 is. And you can see it formats a little differently. Now, again, your designers can control how large, how small, the color, everything of a heading. But you want to use the H1, H2, H3 because it's just how this is supposed to work, right? HTML is a structured markup language. This creates the structure. And by the way, there are some SEO, we think, some SEO implications for this. I'm not going to dive too deep into that because that's not what this is about. This is about just producing really, really good polished stuff. But it is worth thinking about. Now, if you're using WordPress or a similar content management system, again, you can just set the style using a style dropdown. So this is in WordPress, and you'll notice if I click where it said paragraph, I can go from a paragraph to heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, and pre-formatted. All that stuff is in there for you. You just have to remember to use it instead of bolding the text and making it 3 points bigger, which I do still see a lot of people do because it's what you're used to, right? And by the way, these rules, using headings versus paragraphs versus everything else, they work in Microsoft Word and other word processors too. Excuse me for a minute. Sorry about that. Never have more than 13 to 15 words on a line. And people have pushed back against this, on me and said, really, have you tested that, et cetera, et cetera. I haven't. This is just sort of a standard that people have had for many, many, many years. And when I show something to people like this, and then I compare it to something like this, invariably they find this easier to read. And it's not just the white space on either side. If I trim off the white space, they still find it easier to read. Fewer words per line, especially when you're reading on a screen. Screens have come a long way, but they are still harder to read. They're harder to use. The more you can do to give your readers a break, the better. And this might require a little bit of your designer's time once, because they may have to tweak the template to make sure that this happens. Make fonts larger, make them smaller, whatever. But at least you know what to ask for, right? You can now go and say, hey, you know what? I'd like to make sure there's 13 to 15 words on a line. Can you make that change for me? As opposed to just saying, this doesn't look right. Can you please fix it? The other thing you want to do, if you can, is break up your series of paragraphs. So, have 3 to 5 paragraphs and then a heading. And generally, in any written content, what you're going to see is you will have breaks in your topics. Your content will structure that way. So here, I've got all my content in one big mishmash. Here, I've added some headings in between. You can see the difference, right? It's much easier to progress through this. Whether you're scanning or not, it's just easier to figure out exactly what it is that you're going to read as you move through this piece of writing. And by the way, this is also true of things like infographics and slide decks, where you want to have some form of transition between chunks of information. And you'll see that in this deck, in fact. You'll see that I have, orangish, I'm kind of colorblind, but maybe it's brown, I don't know, orange, red, brown, whatever slides for each point, and then I have blue slides creating bigger sections, and then white and black is where I put my examples. There is that structure to it. If you do an infographic, same thing. If you do video, you have some form of transition. Use real list markup. This is the toughest one, probably, because it requires a fair amount of HTML expertise, but I still see people creating lists by just typing in the number 1, typing some text, and then putting in a line break, right? And that ends up looking like this. So when you type in your numbers, there's no spacing between each item, and it wraps right around, right? It doesn't have that hanging indent that you want. If you learn to use HTML list formatting, and again, if you're in WordPress or something similar, you can select the list type, and it will do this for you. Just make sure you do it. Don't just type in 1, because it's not like Word where it will automatically start numbering for you. If you learn to use OL, which is ordered list, and then LI, which is list item, and you just wrap each of these in an LI, you'll get what you want, right? It'll look the way you want it to look. See how there's the hanging indent and everything else? And then smart quotes. And again, this is across every kind of content you can create. If you do an infographic, if you do a slide deck, if you do anything, you want to use smart quotes so that, and these are the entities you can use. So if you want to do a single right-hand quote, you use that set of letters and characters. And I know that looks like a pain, but if you use a shortcut tool like Text Expander, it's very easy, because I just do .rd and hit tab and it shows up. So here's what it looks like if you don't use smart quotes, right? And it almost looks, I don't know how to put it, it looks kind of techy. It looks like it's text on a screen. If you use a smart quote, do you see the difference? You got that curly Q on the quote. It looks better. There's something about it. I don't know. It just looks more sophisticated. And in fact, if you go through the entire piece of writing and do that, if you read this, it has a different feel to it. And it's one of those little things that when you do it, no one's going to look at it and say, oh, hey, they used entities, they used smart quotes. They're not going to say that. But it's one of those little things that improves the return on time invested. And then you should use all the other entities that are out there too. So ellipsis, ampersand, em dash, en dash, these are all things that if you use the entities, they wrap correctly when your text wraps. If you're doing a graphic, it just looks better, because if you just do 3 dots for ellipsis, the spacing is different than if you do an ellipsis. Again, lots of little things that polish stuff up. And by the way, a lot of this does come down to, at some point, some sense of typography and design. I'm not actually going to go into the details of typography here, because I'm trying to stick to things that you as a content producer can do in your content with no intervention by someone else. I could do an entire other session on typography, and I'm not a typographer. I'm going to steer clear of that here, though. In any content you do not be afraid to point. In written content, that means not using 1 and instead of just saying you. And that's perfectly fine. And there's very few styles of writing in marketing where I see it necessary to use 1. There are other styles of writing where you want to do this, but using you has a lot of pluses to it. For one thing, it's gender neutral. For another, it immediately tells the reader, oh, okay, this is for me. And also, it lets you write much more concisely, which was an adverb. Sorry, my bad. Was it an adverb? I think it was an adverb. So instead of sites, and sometimes that makes your writing longer, right? Sites perform better. Your site performs better. Right? That has more of an impact on me. Oh, my site's going to perform better. Okay, that's really important. And again, if you're doing video, this means looking at the camera, right? Looking at the screen. And if you look at Moz's Whiteboard Fridays, for example, they do a good job of making sure that a person is looking at the screen, not at the whiteboard the entire time. That's really aiming the content at the reader or the viewer. Which brings me to visuals. And this opens up a whole set of pet peeves for me. I'm kind of actually just a big container of pet peeves. So this just opens a different cubbyhole of pet peeves. Visuals are obviously desirable, and this is in video, it's in photographs, it's whatever. Don't use stock imagery, okay, if you possibly can, because it's usually really obvious. I believe it was the Rubio campaign here in the United States, but Marco Rubio, a presidential candidate, did a video, I think it was him, about America and running for president, but he used stock video from Canada. So things can go very wrong when you use stock. But also there's some things that start to kind of throw people off. So for example, it's a stock photo if everybody's glass of water is filled at the exact same point. All right, either you're in the nicest restaurant ever and there's a really aggressive water refill person, or there's something really odd. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but the first two water glasses are in almost the same location. And this starts to feel like the Stepford marketing team. The other thing is, this is 5 happy people in a meeting. And this just ticked me off, but they all appear to have perfect skin, which, I'm 47 and the zits are competing with the receding hairline and the wrinkles. So I don't know how they got 5 people with perfect skin who are all happy to be in a meeting and all happen to drink water at exactly the same speed. But this is a stock photograph. And by the way, in case you were wondering, you can always just do a search on Google and see all the places that this image has been used. Okay, that is not good. Stock photos can be very painful. Why are these 2 people smiling and laughing when this maniac is up on the desk yelling at them through a megaphone? I don't understand what's going on here. Okay, don't use stock photos. And I'm exaggerating, of course. There are better stock photos than this, and I use them a lot. I do. If you're going to use stock photos, do something with them. All right. For example, you can add speech bubbles. Again, I'm being silly here, obviously. But you can add some personality to a stock photo. You can make it yours. Okay, so just like pointing at the reader in your writing, you can do that with your stock photos. And instead of having a stock photo that says, I went and downloaded something real quick and I pasted it into my writing so there'd be an image there, you can actually make it something that speaks directly to them. And the tool I use to do this is a tool called Comic Life. It runs on PC and Mac, Windows and Mac OS, and it lets you just create these cool speech bubbles. Now, you can also do this just in PowerPoint or whatever, but if you're just working with images where, randomly in other software, then this is the easiest way to create those speech bubbles. And I'm all about finding tools, by the way, that let me create graphically clean stuff without me being a designer, because I'm not a designer. So everything you're going to hear about in here, everything I'm talking about, they're sort of content polish tips for people who aren't designers and aren't programmers and aren't super sophisticated HTML experts. Now, the other thing I see is people tend to use images as white space. So they'll go in and they'll say, this doesn't look good, so let's add 1 image. And you know what? If we add 1 image, maybe we should add 2. And oh, hold on, we should just put tons of images into this. The images may have nothing whatsoever to do with the content, or they may be very loosely related to the content, and they just sort of start throwing them in there. And I, in the past, have said you should have images to break up the flow of a piece of content. It's not to just break up the flow. The images should have a purpose. They should reinforce whatever's being said in the text or the video or whatever else. In this case, these images provide additional information, right? They support the content. Images should have a purpose like that, excuse me. They should have some kind of real purpose. Now, there are exceptions. Sometimes you just want to have a bizarre image for a feature image just to get attention, or a really colorful image or something like that. Here it's a bunch of foam numbers because we're talking about quality score. I get that. That makes sense. But it's when you start dropping those into, in between paragraphs in a piece of content, or you start showing them in a video just so it's not always a talking head. or you slap them up all over. You put random iconography into an infographic. You want to make sure that images and iconography and everything, that they have a purpose, a real purpose. And of course, sometimes there are images that are just too good to pass up. I'm going to use this image in as many presentations as I possibly can in the next few years, before other people start grabbing it, because I'm stunned. I'm just stunned that someone came up with this. But again, made me stop. You also want to compress your images. Again, I talk about this one all the time. I will stop talking about it when we all start doing it. When I look at a website, I would say 9 times out of 10, it has images that are far larger in file size than they need to be. So when I say compress, I mean reduce the file size. One example of how to do that, this is a naked mole rat, by the way. It's a real living creature. It's alive in that picture, and they always look like that. It didn't fall into a lawnmower or something. The first way to do that is use the right file format. So the file on the left is a portable network graphic, or PNG image. For photographs, that's not the right image format. You want to use JPEG. On the right-hand side is the same image saved as a JPEG with almost zero compression. It's 1/10 the size, which means it will load far faster. As more and more people are using mobile devices, that gets more and more important. Not that you should have a site with bloated images on it if people aren't accessing it with mobile devices. I'm just saying it's even more important. And again, if you think about expectations, when you get a site that's about to launch, when you get a photo and you add it to a piece of content, or you're reading a piece of content that your team has produced, you should expect that this has been done. If it has not been done, it should get done. And there are tools to check this, like Google PageSpeed, but usually it's pretty easy to tell. Because if you look at an image, if you download an image from a blog post or somewhere else, and it's a 800 pixel wide image and it's almost a megabyte in size, something's wrong. All right, there should never be an image on your site that's more than 300 or 400 kilobytes unless you're doing something really fancy. Like our site does a lot of responsive design, so we'll have some really large images on it. But we've also built a set that delivers smaller images that are smaller in dimension and in file size at the same time. Here's an example. So this is a JPEG image, really nice, really detailed. Just reduced it by a factor of 5, and I can't see a difference. Maybe you can. There are easy tools for this. You do not have to learn to use Photoshop to do this. On the Mac, on the Mac, there's a tool called Image Optim. It's free. It's just brilliant. You literally just click and drag images in there, and it compresses them for you. And it can set dimensions and everything else. You can use this if you just want to. Sorry, let me back up. The procedure is pretty simple, right? If you have an image on a site and it's the world labeled page1.jpg, you can download that image, run it through Image Optim, and then just upload it back to the site. Just copy right over it. If you can't do that, that's something you can hand over to whoever it is that maintains the site and say, enter in a help ticket, or just say, hey, if you have some time, when you have some time, can you please upload this? And as soon as they do, it's an instant upgrade. You don't have to do anything else. On the PC, you can look at Cesium. It's another free tool. And again, I'll stop talking about this when we all start doing it. When I can look at 10 sites and 5 of them are properly compressed, I promise I will stop belaboring this point. Well, okay, maybe I don't promise, but I will try very hard to stop belaboring this point. So a couple last things here. Conversations. Again, every piece of content you create creates those ripples. So if you do a social media post, or someone else does, you want to make sure that you respond to the ripples or that you create them yourself. So here someone's commenting that a person in front of them at the Starbucks drive-through bought them their drink. Okay? Starbucks was listening and immediately responded. Now, we don't all have the resources to do this, but this is a really good example of where someone created a piece of content about them, right? A ripple started. And to make sure the ripple kept going, Starbucks went and responded. Starbucks. This is not Battlestar Galactica. Wow. I will not take any more Dayquil today, I promise. Starbucks responds right away, right? They come in and they say, you know what? That's really cool. Yeah, it just made somebody's day. That's awesome. First of all, that person, Kristen, immediately says, oh, wow, Starbucks responded to me, right? And it's pointing, it's looking them in the eye. Second, everybody else sees it. Third, it perpetuates those ripples. If someone comments on something you post in a tool like Facebook, in a site like Facebook, answer those comments. So here's Cadillac talking about their new CTS or ATS-V, which is their super duper fast sort of ultimate behemoth car. And someone posts a question, right? Is this going to have blind spot technology? Now, if someone's asking that question, there's a reasonable chance they're either going to write about it or they're thinking about buying it. You might want to answer that comment. No one from Cadillac showed up and answered the comment. That's kind of sad, right? This was an opportunity to create a great ripple. This was an opportunity to do all sorts of cool stuff and engage this audience. And then on your own blog, answer comments. Even if you don't like them, I did a post on my blog a long time ago. It was sort of one of the, excuse me, one of the first ones that hit it big. And this is what somebody posted, saying I had no understanding of technical issues, which I found kind of funny. And I responded. And actually, this whole thing started with him and me. And I don't usually feed the trolls, but this one was just too much fun. You should respond to most comments. If you get a negative comment, say, I'm really sorry, can I help you with this, or I understand, but, or whatever else. And then if they're trolling, just stop. If someone, just says something really nice, say thanks. If someone, this is, Grey Wolf went in and said this about that post, that same post. And I just responded. I could have responded and said, I differ with you on this. But instead, he had a good point. So I just went and did it. But when I went and did it, I said, you know what? You're right. I'm going to remove the no follows now. Again, it's that ripple effect, right? You want to capitalize on it. If someone does that tweet, you want to be there to respond. If someone responds, you want to respond to that. If you see a piece of content performing well, you want to email it out to people that you know. So it's always perpetuating those ripples. More general tips before we wrap up here. Link when it makes sense. Okay, this is too much. That's too many links. Unless, even if you're selling umbrellas, I don't care. This makes more sense, right? Because these are links people are going to want to click. Someone may want to go and see the report on Bicycling Magazine. They may want to go see about this other bicycle. So instead of asking how many links should I have on the page, please don't ask that. Okay, there's no good answer to that. Instead of asking that, ask, will someone click this link? And think about it carefully. I mean, if someone clicked that link, would they genuinely be pleased by the result they got? This one sounds a little mean, but avoid the duh sentence. And I can say it because I do it probably more than anybody else. Just don't say the obvious stuff. Okay, I actually wrote this in a blog post once. Content is really important. Really? Who knew? You can just delete that sentence. You don't have to do anything else. You delete that sentence and I guarantee your writing will be better because you'll just dive right in. Same thing with a video, right? If this is a video script, don't waste precious seconds saying something obvious like that. Same thing in an infographic, right? You've got limited real estate. Don't do that. Again, think about return on time invested. Am I going to get a good return on time invested if I'm reading that? Avoid the bandwagon. All right. Everybody, Nike just deleted. Yeah, I think I'd get sued if I did that, but I like that. Blog posts, everybody went berserk about blog posts and they still are. And I get calls from people, how many blog posts will you write for me? Okay, sure. Yes, I understand. And we do need to write them. And that's because a blog is an easy content management system. But don't go too wild with it. If everybody else is doing it, chances are the results are going to be a little bit diluted by the sheer number of people. Infographics. Everybody went nuts on infographics. Infographics are still good if they are done well. If it's a useful infographic where using that format enhances the quality of the information. And that's really the key here, is use the right format. Right? Everybody right now is going nuts over Snapchat video. Well, ignoring the audience, forget about who looks at Snapchat. Is what you're about to talk about something that is improved by the fact that it's going to be delivered in a short video? Is it going to be improved by the fact that it goes away after a while? And there are cases like that. Which brings me to the fact that, yes, there are other formats and places to publish content, and you should never forget about this. SlideShare. SlideShare has been amazing for me, and I've stuck to it for years and years and years. And they made me a keynote author, and that's not because of some fantastic talent or connection. It was just sheer persistence on my part. Vine, Instagram, Scribd, or Scribd, I don't know how you pronounce that, doing a Kindle ebook, doing audio, doing a webinar, by the way, and then recording it. Those are all great ways to deliver content and repurpose, right? Like I'm doing this webinar. Well, the slide deck will be up on SlideShare. The video will be up on our site, and then I'm going to get the video transcribed, and that'll be on the same page as the video itself. So you repurpose, and you just remember all these places. Can you push the content to all these places without even doing additional work? And if not, always think about, is this piece of content best delivered as a slide deck? Is it best delivered as text? Think about all the other formats, and think about the other places. Some of them are trendy, like Medium and LinkedIn Pulse, but there's also Quora and Reddit and all these other sites where you can publish long or short form content. And I know people say, well, I'm using this to get more keywords on my site, which makes me want to stab myself in the liver with a spoon. But I understand the thinking behind that. First of all, that doesn't work. And second of all, think about the audiences. If you really want to use content just for SEO, then you want it to do two things, right? You want it to get links and improve relevance. Well, you're not going to get any links when your audience is teeny. So put your content where you can have a content dealer, someone who's going to push it out to many, many, many people. Do that a few times, build your audience, and then put stuff on your own site. That's why you publish elsewhere. And yeah, I went over 30 things. So remember that one piece of content impacts everything. Again, think about the ripple effect. Really, really important. Always think about that when you're producing your content. And then also remember, 10x content does not mean 10x effort. All right, 10x content, which is an industry term, saying just really high quality content. That doesn't mean you have to do 10 times as much work. Do all these little things. If you do all these little things, if you just pick the ones you can do, okay? Use entities, use smart quotes. If that's the only thing you do, just use those, right? And start doing that. And then maybe compress your images. Or if you can't do that, maybe start using Hemingway. Do the things you can, and you move closer and closer to producing that 10x content. And then the last thing is you got to ship it. And I just gave you this long list of things to execute on. It can induce a certain amount of paralysis. It does it to me sometimes, where I want everything to be perfect. At some point, it's got to get out there. The beauty of digital is if you get something out there that's less than flawless, you can fix it up and tune it up later. So make sure you ship it, because getting that content out there is as important as producing it and polishing it up. So like I said, always be sure to ship it. And that's it. The slides and links will be at portent.co. That's correct, .co. 30 content things. And I will tweet that out shortly. And we got a little bit of time for questions. I see a few here in the question and answer section, so I'm going to take a look at those. Can you suggest a resource for learning basic HTML? That's a good question. I'm a little biased just because I wrote one, not about HTML, but the Dummies books are really, really good. You can just do a search. I think there used to be a site called htmlgoodies.com. I have no idea what's there now, so just, go there with a certain amount of caution. The W3C site, and you have to search for W3C HTML, is really good. Those are the only other ones I can think of off the top of my head. I will post a few resources to the link list as well. File format for delivering content. Do you deliver from a text editor with HTML? Do you deliver it? I never deliver writing in Microsoft Word. Ever, ever, ever. I'm a purist, so I actually don't use any form of visual editor, no form of what you see is what you get or WYSIWYG editor. I actually use a tool called Markdown, and a text editor called Sublime Text, and then I write everything in Markdown and export it to HTML. That gives me a very, very clean HTML. In WordPress, you can use their visual editor or use their plain text editor, and it will do things like add paragraphs for you. So I would just steer clear of any desktop word processing software of any kind, because yeah, it's going to screw it up. And also, don't deliver Word content to, if you're writing it and someone else is posting it, don't give it to them in a Word document. Give them text. Even if you don't format it, and you should, but even if you don't format it, give them plain text and then separate images, because it's impossible to take the images out of a Word document and have any reasonable quality, and it's really hard to take the text out of a Word document. But my recommendation is learn HTML, or even better, learn Markdown, and I'm going to do a whole separate webinar on that, by the way. What was the image compressor for Windows? It's Caesium, C-A-E-S-I-U-M, as in Mary. Code Academy, that's a really good idea. You can go to codeacademy.com and learn a lot about HTML there. It's a great resource. And that's, thank you for putting that there. You're welcome. Good alternative source. What's a good alternative source for images rather than stock photos? I carry my cell phone around a lot, and I just take photos of interesting things. But also, usually the images in a particular piece of content are going to relate to the topic. So it might be screen captures or relevant stuff. It might be images of the things you are talking about. And again, you can use stock photos, just don't use them like stock photos. That's such a worthless piece of advice. But try to make sure if you use a stock photo, use something that's directly relevant, right? If you're talking about cars, about tires, make sure you have a car with a tire on it and point to it, and make sure that somehow reinforces the information that you've got. Josh, I'm not sure which, just suggested a site called Pexels, Pexels.com. It's another good place to go get some really cool images. They are still stock, and they'll show up around the web, but again, they don't look like your average stock photos. Let's see, next question. What are your thoughts on content length? If an article gets long, is it worth breaking it up into a series? Where do you draw the line, such as 10 paragraphs? I don't worry about content length at all. And if you read some of my posts, you'll know that I write posts that are 150 words. I've written posts that are 10,000 words. The main thing I look at is, will this be consumable? If I write a 10,000 word post and decide that it's just going to be a complete slog, then I'll break it up into smaller posts. But again, it has to make sense topically. So how do I put this? How do I explain this? If I write that 10,000 word post and it easily divides up into 4 sections, 4 chunks, I'm probably going to divide those up into smaller posts. If nothing in there can stand alone, then I'm going to make it one big post and just publish it all at once. What's your view on putting different text blocks or subjects in different colors on the page? It's more a design thing than I probably have the expertise for. I would say that I will generally look at changing background colors and things only for information that I need to somehow point out or differentiate. And this is true in print. And by the way, it's also true in any other format, including video. If I'm going to change the setting, the basic context of something, excuse me again, it's because I'm emphasizing it. So if I'm going to go from a motion graphic in the background of a video to a static background, there's got to be a reason. If I'm going to change a chunk of text and put it on a gray background, it should be either a block quote or a pull quote or something like that. Pexels, again, it pulls in lots of free images from other sites. Non-stock images can be found via Flickr under Creative Commons. Yes, you can always go to Flickr and also on Google and search for images that are licensed under the Creative Commons. Check and make sure which license it is. Make sure it's a it probably has to be commercial and allow reuse, obviously, and make sure you always give credit for that image. But again, make sure the image makes sense in context. Can you talk a bit about font usage, serif versus sans serif, variety of fonts on a page, etc.? The rules for this have changed a lot. I used to just say you must always use sans serif on a screen, but I have to say that now, serif, there's some downsides to that, like telling the difference between a lowercase l and a capital I can be difficult in some sans serif fonts. The best place to look for more information about typography in general is look for a book called Typography for Lawyers. It is a fantastic ebook. It is one of the best works on typography I've ever seen. Also look for, I think it's called the Big Book of Font Combinations. You can take a look there. But generally, I don't want to see more than 2 types of fonts on a page, maybe 3. And that includes in an infographic, and it includes in video. I don't want to see fonts getting mixed up, because generally if you're getting that many kinds of fonts, you're doing it for the sake of using different fonts. That's never a good idea in content. You want to make sure that you're using, there's a reason again. Does Notepad work as a text editor? Yes, it will work as a text editor. The feature set is pretty limited in Notepad. I would look at something like Sublime Text or well, Sublime Text is the one that springs to mind for me, just because I use it so much, because it just has so many nice ways to set it up to make it easier, but you can always use Notepad. Does uploading content through a program like Hootsuite to multiple social media platforms decrease visibility versus posting individually on each one? A while ago, Facebook said, they came out and said that yes, using some kind of convenience posting software will impact the edge rank of that content. Now, Facebook doesn't really use edge rank anymore, but I know if I'm Facebook, I don't want to rank content as high if someone's spamming it out, not spamming it out. If they're posting it out to many, many different accounts at once, I want to rank content that's written and designed purely for Facebook. And that goes for Buffer too. And I use Buffer all the time, but I generally use it for Twitter for that reason. I don't think Twitter hits you for that, but use a program like Hootsuite because it makes your life easier. The other thing I would say is, who knows how much of an impact it has? It may be a tiny impact. Try it. See if you get a lot less visibility. Let's see, you got a few questions in off of Twitter. John asks, can you talk a little more about how involved you think marketing leadership should be in this kind of attention to detail? How do you balance that between training or expectation setting, spot checks, and intervention? John, I can only tell you how I do it, and I'm a little bit of an outlier, but I set expectations, definitely. I also do a lot of trainings, and I always offer to my team that they can always come to me with a piece of content, and I can work with them on it. And then I don't just take it and edit it. I'm going to sit down with them and point stuff out. And then if there's no time at all, I will edit it, but I make sure there are comments and I make sure I explain why I'm making those changes. Intervention, look, you're responsible for the quality of what's getting out there. At some point, excuse me, you do have to intervene if you really think there's problems. Now, I wouldn't intervene to get that last 10% of polish. That's a training opportunity, a teaching opportunity. You intervene if things are really coming off the rails. Spot checks, again, hard to tell. I love to read my team's stuff, so I guess it's always being spot checked. I don't know if that helps or not. Sean asks, I've heard you talk about the fact that Google spell checks websites as a measure of overall quality, which impacts my ability to move up in search results. Do they check grammar and readability as well? If so, how would you use this to justify more expensive or time-intensive content to our leadership team? All right, so I'm going to have a brief rant here. If you have to convince your leadership team of the value of good grammar and spelling, please let me know, quit your job, and come work for me, because that is possibly the most painful thing I've ever heard. That said, yeah, it does impact your site on Google. It is one of those little factors. Obviously, getting 20 really top quality links from major outlets and their organic links and everything else, that's a bigger deal. But everything you can do to polish your content helps. If for no other reason, then we know Google looks at bounce back, right? We know that if someone clicks on a search result and bounces right back to the search result, they see that as a problem. We're almost out of time. I'm going to try and jump through these last 2 that I've got from Twitter, and then we can, I'm happy to take questions over Twitter as well later on. Jessica asks, if we were going to do something with this, would you advise starting with people who are creating our content or the folks editing our content before we publish it to our site? I would always start with the content creators, because if the content creators learn how to do this and do a good job, it reduces the burden on the editors to be proofreaders, which is different. and lets the editors be editors. So it's always best to start this at the very core of what you're doing, of the team. Steve asked, also, a lot of those content producers are going to become your editors someday, so can't hurt. Steve asked, you mentioned a lot of really nitty-gritty things here, which are hard to argue with, but can take a lot of time to fix during review. How long do you think it takes for this kind of quality-first approach to pay off? Excuse me. How do we know if it's working? Well, quality-first approach, first of all, instead of thinking about justifying the resources, think about the resources you have and do what you can. Because it's always hard to reach out and say, I need more resources. And I need it because of this. Because people will then say, well, why can't you just do it that way in the first place? So first thing, as far as justifying it, again, how long does it take for it to have an effect? I mean, it has an effect the moment someone reads a piece of content that has a compressed image, so it loads faster and is divided up so that they read more of the content, or is an infographic that's truly compelling. That has an instant impact. What's the impact? I don't know. And ROI of content, I could rant for hours and hours and everybody would sign off and I get fired by all my clients. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, look, this is talking, right? This stuff you're creating, this is talking. And the better job you do of talking, the more likely you are to keep your customers and keep your clients and get more good customers and clients. So we got 2 more things in the questions area. I'm going to get through these. I understand people have to go, but what about syndicated blog posts? Some marketing services offer 1 syndicated blog post per week and then package them in a monthly newsletter. Seems good for content generation. However, it's non-unique. Okay, I'm going to insult about 1,000 people here. I've never seen good writing from a syndicated blog post service. I'm sorry, I just haven't. But leaving that out, is your audience going to be are they going to truly get a return on time invested with that syndicated post? If the answer is yes, then it's worth it. If not, then don't. Just because something isn't unique doesn't mean it won't provide a return on time invested, because your readers may know you and not the other place it's being published. But again, you really got to look at the writing. I have not seen very high quality writing. Also, always take those blog posts, cut and paste a sentence into Google and no, never mind that, because they're not unique. Just approach it with caution, and if you think it'll provide that return on time invested, go for it. What are your thoughts on creating highly shareable content that still has substance? Yes, definitely do that. That was a pretty easy one, actually. I'm not exactly sure what the question is there. I think, highly shareable content, I think I see what you're asking. Highly shareable content, you can do it for the sake of being highly shareable, right? You can put in the outrageous image or whatever. Content that has substance, though, will be shareable forever. So it may not hit a home run right away. And if you remember that graph of Portent site traffic, it may not hit a home run right away or ever, but it will always gain shares. It will always get attention. So you can go for the spectacular home run and you'll get it, and you'll see this huge explosion of traffic. Generally after that, you're disappointed because it goes away, right? It just kind of disappears. All right, everybody, that's it. Remember, you can tweet questions to me at @portentint, and the slides and links are at portent.co/30contentthings, all lowercase, and I will be posting the video and some other links there shortly. Thank you very much.